Hi guys, how are you all today morning? Good morning. Today is 9th December 2023. My name is TSV Raghavan and I live in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, India. This is my spiritual vlog on YouTube. HARDAN, 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 Haribol, TRSV, Nectar, NECTAR, Nectar. In this particular vlog, in all my previous videos, we have been trying to discuss the knowledge and information that we have gleaned through the study of spiritual books, scriptures, contemplation on the material universe, and meditation on the spiritual universe. This particular video in this vlog is no exception to that rule. In fact, it is a mere continuation of all that we have been doing in all my previous videos. Kindly subscribe to this vlog and press the bell icon so that I may continue to remind you of all my previous, present, and future videos. So let us continue with the topic of discussion for today's video. Kindly remember that we are talking in this series a term called mind, which plays a perennial role in the psyche, intelligence, experience, maturity, and action of any living entity, whether male or female, in a lifetime in this material world. Because we are talking only about mind as such, we must be able to take into consideration all human living entities, male and female, regardless of the walks of life they are treading on. Now, what is mind? According to Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his Srimad Bhagavad Gita, he has described mind as the main instrument that drives this chariot of human material body, which has several horses that represent various senses, one driver which is represented by intelligence, the back seat passenger which is represented by the individual spirit soul, and so on. We should remember now that mind is the main driving instrument of this particular chariot of life. The chariot represents the human living entity. The human living entity, whether male or female, is actually four layers of material body that envelops the spirit soul, which initially, in its complacence, tries to lord it over this huge, infinite material universe under the wrong impression that it can do so, and in that process, due to the irritation caused by the touch of that spirit soul with the material world. This material world envelops the same spirit soul with four layers of material body, and then starts the infinite journey of several births and deaths of that spirit soul into this material world in various species till it reaches the species of human race. Here I would like to remember that as soon as it becomes a capsule of combination of the spirit soul and the four layers of material body, this spirit soul, which was individual in its initial stages and was actually just one minuscule part of spiritual energy, suddenly loses its identity as a spirit soul and becomes what is known as living entity. It is this living entity which is described as a chariot in Srimad Bhagavad Gita. As soon as one individual living entity remains in this material world without realizing its true identity as the original spirit soul, it does not attain self realization. These things we must remember before proceeding further. Now, as I mentioned before, mind is just an instrument, just like the engine is an instrument in driving any vehicle, whether it is a four-wheeler, a two-wheeler, a bike, a car, a limousine, a truck, or even a train, and so on. Without that instrument, this particular vehicle is nothing but scrap. Similarly, without the identity or existence of mind in a chariot of human living entity, this body of four layers and that spiritual within is just a scrap. The passenger, which is the individual spirit soul in that chariot, leaves that chariot immediately after the mind stops working. The mind is connected directly to a mass of tissue called brain, which is placed firmly embedded into the cranium of the gross body of a living entity. This living entity is identified in the society as a separate entity only through his or her gross body. Without this subtle mind sending vibrations as transmissions into the brain, this gross body will not work. As soon as it stops sending such transmissions into the brain, this living entity drops its body. And when it drops this body, that spirit soul becomes a part of a chariot with only three layers of subtle body, which are causal body of intelligence, astral body of mind, feelings, and emotions, and the etheric body of five senses, namely sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. The causal body of intelligence represents the logic. The spirit soul, the causal body, the astral body, the etheric body, and the gross body are cemented together thanks to one another item known as ego. This ego is the main glue that cements the joints between all of these individual entities, that is, bodies, being spirit, soul, causal body, astral body, etheric body, and gross body. This ego acts as a catalyst in this process. Ego is of three types. One is known as false ego. This false ego makes the living entity identify only with his or her four layers of material body. This is a false type of notion that is usually nourished by every living entity. On the other hand, the real ego is when the same entity begins to realize its true self as that individual spirit soul and not as a capsule of four layers of material body that envelops this spirit soul. There is another type of ego. It is known as superego. Superego is when the same living entity and the individual spirit soul identifies himself or herself with being a part and parcel of this spirit whole. He or she tries to lose his or her false identity as a living entity and false identity as an individual spirit soul. This happens continuously when the brain stops transmitting vibrations into when the mind stops transmitting vibrations and transmissions from other subtle bodies into the mass of tissue called brain. This brain becomes what is known as brain dead. Brain dead is equal to being that living entity stopping to live in that particular lifetime and to pass on to another birth. In other words, a chariot, as mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, is applicable or is useful only when or till that mind keeps transmitting messages to the mass of tissue called brain in that living entity. Once this chariot is destroyed, the spirit soul may very well dismount that chariot and enter as a passenger in the three layers of subtle body of that living entity till he or she takes birth in another gross body which is founded on or originating from the prarabdha karma of that living entity. This is going on and on infinitely till one day that living entity, which has realized its true identity as a spirit soul, decides to dismount this path of repeated births and deaths in this material world and finally get liberated from this material world. Once it does so and it succeeds in this process, this so called living entity, which is now an a spirit soul, has become an evolved spirit soul with more knowledge, mellow nature, maturity, experience, and the required qualification to blend into the supreme personality of Godhead. This final process is known as deliverance. In other words, the moment a living entity stops enjoying this material life and tries to walk on the spiritual path, the first stage is that of self realization as a spirit soul. Second, liberation from this repeated process of birth and death in this material world. And third, get finally delivered as a evolved spirit soul into the supreme personality of Godhead. This is applicable to every human living entity, whether male or female, and whether he is from one walk of life or from another. It is applicable to every one of us. We will know about this in this talk about various case histories which will authenticate this fact. But before that, let me remind you that the 100% multitude of human living entities in the society in a particular lifetime consists of 75% mundane human living entities, 20% of those who are attracted to the negative and dark forces of this material world, and only 5% to the positive and spiritual forces of this material world. However, mind is applicable to all of us. The Supreme Personality of Godhead gives free will and equal opportunity to every individual living entity, whether he belongs or she belongs to the mundane category, the 20% negative forces attracted category, or the 5% positive and spiritual forces category. So, when we are talking about mind, we must also take into consideration the mundane people, the negative people, and the positive people. In my past few videos, we have been talking about only those who were spiritual in nature and whose mind operated accordingly. But from now on, we will make an exception. We will also deal with people who contributed a lot in this material world, either as a part and parcel of the 5% category, or the 20% category, or the rest 75% category. So let us begin with our discussion on this 20% category. There are several very interesting case histories even in this 20% category. Mind of people in this category also operates just like the others, and hence it is very interesting and intriguing to study that particular mind and the life of a living entity who chose to worship the negative forces in this material world and society. So let us proceed. There was one particular boy who was born on 26th July 1902 in a place called Newark in the state of New Jersey in America, or United States of America. This boy belonged to a family called Zulman. So this boy, when he was christened, his name became Abner Zulman. Later in his lifetime, he was called Longy because of his 6 foot 2 inches height. So the complete name the underworld came to know him with was Abe, that is short for Abner Longy because of his height, and Zulman, which was his surname in his family. Abe Longy Zulman is the person whose case history we will try to discuss in this discussion about the driving instrument called mind in every human living entity. Let us discuss about the mind of Abner or Abe Longy Zulman. This boy was born in very humble circumstances in a large Jewish family in Navarre. Because of this, his mind became quite active to make this particular living entity survive in this tough material world and society. That was precisely the reason, along with his own humble circumstances, that made this guy go to work instead of getting educated in some school and graduating in some college. This was the reason for his mind acting in this strange fashion. At the age of 12, this boy started earning enough money to support his own family financially. For this, he became a push cart driver selling vegetables, fruits, and provisions. From here, this very talented young man began learning from the streets instead of school books. So, in a very short time, he became quite practical and street smart. Because of his height and build, he was able to attract other boys who were contemporaries and of his or around his age with himself, and he started a tiny gang of young, fresh blooded, hot blooded youth who took the responsibility to protect other poor elderly businessmen and shopkeepers, vendors, hawkers, etc. in that area from Irish gangsters who were trying to torment, molest, and loot those innocent, deserving Jewish traders. This made Abe Zulman quite experienced in street fights, brawls, and other such tough circumstances. By the age of 16, this guy tried to replenish his income by selling drugs through hats which he sold as salesman in various households. Because of his build and his looks, he was very attractive to the opposite sex, which was so fond of this young, handsome man that women invariably purchased hats from this young man, while those hats had drugs safely embedded into them by Zulman. Though these women knew about it, they covertly supported this young man in his struggle to replenish his actual income and to support his own family financially. This went on and on till one day the period of prohibition arrived in United States of America. We shall continue with this discussion of this particular case history in my another video tomorrow or day after or so on. Till that time, this is all I want to talk about in this particular video about Abe Longy Zulman and his own mind, which acted as an instrument in his own chariot of living entity in that lifetime. Kindly let me know what you think of my talk on this particular matter. Please give me your own expert thoughts, views, ideas, and opinions so that I may blend everything together for the sake of this society. Before concluding, let me remind you that I am also a published author with Amazon Kindle and paperback. I write on spiritualism, fiction, and assorted subjects. Spiritualism happens to be my favorite subject. Till we meet in my next video, it is good morning from TSV Raghavan.